When I became a doctor, I swore to a code of ethics that every physician is expected to follow. It's called the Hippocratic Oath. It was drawn up over 2,000 years ago by an ancient Greek named Hippocrates, who was known as the father of medicine. In part, the oath says, I will do no harm or injustice. I always carry this card with me, so I can be reminded on a daily basis of those words, do no harm. That principle was put to the test in December of 1944 when I was an Army doctor in the Philippines. I'd graduated from Rice University, and I had attended Texas Medical School, and I was practicing at what was then known as Madison General Hospital. In 1940, an affiliated medical unit was formed with the intention of training and supplying doctors and nurses to the military. Surgeon General Norman T. Kirk gave his approval for the creation of the 44th General Hospital, and in 1943, medical staff were sent to Fort Sill in Oklahoma for training. In addition to developing our skills as physicians and surgeons, we also undertook a rigorous crash course in soldiering. This entailed forced marches with a 40-pound backpack, crawling under barbed wire while live ammunition was fired over our heads, and tear gas drills in a gas-filled room. We also learned how to put up tents and facilities, how to manage supplies, and how to operate a field hospital under hostile conditions. One skill we were denied, however, was the use of firearms. Although the training was recommended, high-level Army commanders decreed it unnecessary because, in their words, all we'd need to know how to do is march on and off for trains and ships. This short-sighted assumption would later prove to be near disastrous. After finishing our training, 44th was shipped out to Australia. There we continued preparing and training for deployment to Leyte in the Philippines. Our roster consisted of about 50 medical doctors and 100 nurses and about 500 medical corpsmen. We were part of the largest medical organization in the world during the war, with over 500,000 people in nearly 700 overseas facilities to care for the sick and the wounded. Now, when the Japanese Imperial Army drove him out of the Philippines in 1942, General Douglas MacArthur made his famous vow, I shall return. Now here he was, at the head of the 6th Army, ready to fulfill his promise. And so it was that in November of 1944, we waited our turn to come ashore on White Beach on Leyte Island. The sea battle that had waged in Leyte Gulf was the biggest and most costly naval engagement of all time. Both sides had inflicted massive losses on the other, and on the day of the invasion, the sea was crowded with vessels of every size. Landing craft were bobbing in the waves as a heavy bombardment from the naval guns drove the enemy from the shoreline. And when the time was right, the sand swarmed with American soldiers as they secured the beachhead. As men and materials were being unloaded on the island, it was time for the 44th General Hospital to bring our supplies ashore. It turned out that the landing was just a first step in what became a logistical nightmare. Everywhere we turned was mud, and the heavy rain seemed to be near incessant. Ground above the beach was nothing more than swamp, and moving forward was painfully slow. And the Japanese had built tank traps in the muddy ground, and were now beginning to put up a stiffer resistance. And because a fully functional Allied airfield had not yet been established, Japanese planes were strafing the beaches and attacking the supporting American battleships. It looked like the invasion had stalled. Now, as we struggled with conditions on the ground, our eyes were drawn to a terrible sight. A single Japanese plane, a Zero, was hurtling toward one of our supply ships. Oblivious to the gunfire around it, it slammed into the hull of the ship, exploding in a mass of red flame and black smoke. We'd seen the very first kamikaze attack. 135 American sailors lost their lives that morning as we could only stand helplessly by on the shoreline and watch. Still, the advance into the heart of the island continued. The fighting was ferocious. Both sides were determined to take command of the ground. Finally, 6th Army's 7th Infantry Division forced their way inland. They cleared a 20-mile path for us to set up our base in a village called Barawan, just in time to begin treating the very first casualties from the deadly combat. An official medical journal had said that the 44th landing was accomplished with pup tents and K-rations. It was a testament to the courage of our soldiers and our many supply personnel that we made it to the foot of the mountains. And while an Army engineering unit was repairing and building airfields around Barawan, we established our hospital and organized our roster. Care of our wounded men was, of course, our first priority, but disease was also rife. with dysentery and malaria especially wreaking havoc. We also treated the little Filipino children who were suffering from malnutrition. Meanwhile, the battle was still being waged all across the island. Apparently, Japanese high command had decided that Leyte was going to be the decisive battle in the war in the Pacific. Thousands of Imperial troops were converging on the island from Manchuria, Korea, and Japan. Plan was to overwhelm the American forces and drive them back into the sea once and for all. Fighting was horrifically bloody. In the hospital tents, we were deluged with wounded men, and we struggled to keep up with the constant stream of casualties. Surgery was often done by lamplight and often interrupted by an aerial attack from a low-flying Zero. Now, our medics had to decide if someone found in the field was capable of surviving. If they were, they brought them back to the relative safety of the hospital before courageously heading back out into the fray to look for other survivors. It was grisly work. On December 18th, the Japanese began dropping paratroopers behind our lines and attacking the hospital base. We'd been left isolated when our own troops had pushed further into the interior of the island. Now, there were a few enlisted men to fight on our side, but they were easily outnumbered by the Japanese attackers. So they set up a perimeter as best they could, and we all dug foxholes for cover. But now we were left with a moral decision. As doctors and nurses, we're sworn to uphold the sanctity of human life. Hippocratic oath makes no distinction between people. Harming an enemy is no less immoral than harming a friend. So how do we square it with our consciences if, to defend our patients, we had to take another life? And it soon became clear that the distinction between the opposing forces was that the Japanese had nothing to lose and were fighting to die, whereas the Americans had much to gain and were fighting to live. So, with no training in our use, dozens of medical staff took up arms alongside our soldiers in a bid to save as many lives as they could. Now, digging in at our own positions, we repelled wave after wave of Japanese attack. In the pouring rain and in the cover at night, the limited visibility left us vulnerable, and there was a very real danger we'd end up in hand-to-hand combat. A couple of machine gun nests manned by troops from the Signal Corps kept the advancing enemy at bay. Meanwhile, we desperately tried to care for the wounded and the dying. It was a ghastly situation. When dawn broke in the morning, our enemy was nowhere to be seen. Our ragtag heroes, signalmen, medics, cooks, drivers, dentists, we'd held our own with only 2 lives lost. It was a remarkable achievement. When hostilities were over, Major General Kirk, Surgeon General of the Army, he said we were the finest that ever served. Legend of the 44th was born. Well, as for me, I returned to civilian life as a gastroenterologist. I taught at UW-Madison, and I served as a consultant to the Army. I still carry this little card with me, so I can be reminded that when you take an oath, you be sure to keep it, even in the face of overwhelming odds.